I turned round, there was a whole line of people at the bus stop watching me with their mouths open, thinking, who is this guy? He obviously really needs this money. And as I was getting these coins into the other suitcase in the pouring rain, the money truck drove away. Check, 1, 2. My name's Pete Spurrier and I run Blacksmith Books, which is a Hong Kong publishing house. And we focus on publishing non-fiction about Hong Kong, so it's memoir, photography, exploring the city, true crime. I found Hong Kong to be a good place for publishing because historically it's been a place of great freedom of speech. We're right on the edge of China as well, which has very high quality printing and at very good cost. Publishing is quite meaningful. Many times I find a lot of my authors are people who are newly retired. That's when they've got the time to write their life stories or write things they've been thinking about for a long time and never had the time. And they've been trying other publishers in places like Singapore, London, couldn't find a publisher. So if they couldn't find a publisher, they would have just left their manuscript in a drawer somewhere. So if I hadn't published them, they wouldn't have been seen, they wouldn't have been read by people around the world. So I'm quite flattered that people bring me their stories, and I'm still interested in publishing more. Yeah, there's a few books that I'm quite proud of bringing to print. One was one of the earliest ones I did, a book called King Hoi, which was the biography of a playboy, a Hong Kong playboy who was born in the 1920s, lived until 1993 in Hong Kong all that time. So he lived through some very difficult times, including the World War II in Hong Kong. What was especially unusual was that the subject of the book, Peter Hoi, during the war, he'd lost all his money gambling, but he didn't want to lose that lifestyle, so he started working with the Japanese who were occupying Hong Kong at the time. And maybe a lot of people did that then, but not everyone else was happy to talk about it. But because he was at the end of his life, he had no shame, he spoke his story very honestly. And at the end of the book, at the end of his life, he's complaining that none of his 12 children will come to visit him on Cheung Chau, and he can't understand why. But as the reader, you've read his life of a complete rascal for 70 years, you can really understand why they didn't want to visit him. That book is a real, very accurate social history of Hong Kong, I think, throughout the 20th century. A book that was published last year is about the Kowloon Walled City, written and photographed and sketched by a woman who went in there in 1985 as a 22-year-old woman at the time. And the Walled City has always had a reputation as a place of crime, where a lawless place where normal people wouldn't go, would be too afraid to enter. And she found that wasn't the case at all. She found that it was welcoming. It was full of people who were working. They weren't all criminals. They were actually running small factories. They were dentists and doctors, all sorts of businesses in there. And she was welcomed as a young artist. They would sit her down in the street and say, yeah, sit here and sketch us and photograph and look at the real life of the Kowloon Walled City. These sketches and photographs then sat in her attic for more than 30 years, and we just published them last year. So I'm quite pleased to bring this out to show that image that a lot of people had of the Kowloon Walled City as a den of crime was not the full story. Hong Kong may be a small place on the map, but actually it's very dense. It's packed full of surprising things. And you can spend, I have actually spent years exploring Hong Kong, and I still haven't seen all of it. Then also recently, Sunset Survivors is a book of photography and interviews with the people who are doing Hong Kong's old trades, which has been very interesting to get involved with. The author has been doing walking tours around old parts of Kowloon and Wan Chai, so people can visit these people, watch them performing their old trades before they stop. In most cases, these people are the last of their kind running these businesses, making these particular implements, and their children usually don't want to learn from them, nor do they want their children to learn from them, because they'd rather their children went and had a more lucrative career. Publishing is quite a difficult business to succeed in, I found, because it's very speculative. You never know if a book is going to sell until you've got it in the bookshop. And usually I get it right after years of doing this. My judgment is quite good on what will sell, but sometimes I get it wrong. And in 2013, I think it was, I nearly went bust, entirely due to my own fault. I wasn't keeping on top of the accounts. There were people running bookshops in different parts of Asia who weren't paying me, and I wasn't on top of that. I then had 4 books in a row which didn't work, didn't sell very well, which is very rare actually. It's never happened before or since. And then I got a big order from a US bookshop, which I was very excited about, and shipped it over there, and then that bookstore chain went bust. So I had no money. I'd really put myself in a stupid situation. I was very angry with myself because this wasn't a new business at the time. I'd already been doing it for 7 or 8 years. I should have known better, but I had no money. I couldn't pay the bills. I couldn't pay anybody. It was very embarrassing, although I didn't tell anybody at the time. But I remembered I had no cash in the bank, either in the company or in my own bank account. But I remembered I'd been collecting coins at home. Every time I got home, I'd empty my pockets into a jar, a bottle. I thought, that'll do. I'll go to that government money truck that always goes around different districts. They'll convert it into notes for me, and I'll be able to pay a few bills here and there. So I gathered all these coins together. They filled 2 suitcases, actually, in the end. One very strong leather suitcase and one sort of sports holdall. And it weighed a ton. I managed to get these bags of coins down the hill from my village onto the minibus, which was going to where the money truck was hanging out. And it was a rainstorm, the roads were flooded, took ages to get there. When I finally arrived, I got off the minibus, I could see the government money truck there across the road. I ran to it through the rain, and this holdall just burst. All these thousands of coins spilled out across the road, into the puddles, into the rain, and what could I do? I had to get down on my hands and knees. I was scooping them up. I threw my umbrella aside because that was no use, and trying to get all these coins into the other suitcase. And I suddenly felt that feeling that you might have when you know someone's watching you. And I turned around. There was a whole line of people at the bus stop watching me with their mouths open, thinking, who is this guy? He obviously really needs this money. And as I was getting these coins into the other suitcase in the pouring rain, the money truck drove away. It worked out right in the end. Before the end of the month, I got a big payment in from a bookshop, so I was able to pay people, and I took that as a lesson to stay more on top of things.